Well, good afternoon. Now, in the previous class, we were talking about the perpetual peace of Kant. First thing we had seen there that in order to achieve perpetual peace, we must promote democracy. We have seen a lot of that. What exactly is the meaning of democracy? How much democracy exists in the world, and how does democracy reduce the possibility of war? This we have talked about. Second, we will talk about now. Write down, you can write it down yourself. He said, first, secondly, that every country in the world should come together and form what he called a League of Nations. Every country in the world should come together and form a League of Nations. Now, what should be the purpose of a League of Nations? Well, he said the main purpose of the League of Nations should be two. First of all, in League of Nations, every country should make a commitment to protect the human rights of every person living within that country. So that is the one important commitment that every country should make, protect the human rights of every human being within the jurisdiction of that country, number one. And second thing that the League of Nations should do is to, you can say, to provide a conflict resolution mechanism. To provide a conflict resolution mechanism. So, in this case, what does that mean? Idea here is that conflict is an integral part of human relationship. Every human relationship have conflict sometimes or the other. So, main purpose of the League of Nations should be to ensure that the conflict is resolved in a peaceful manner. Because earlier what used to happen that whenever you can say two countries have some disagreement with each other, only way to find a solution to that problem was that they used to fight a war. Whoever wins will take everything and whoever loses will lose everything. So that was the earlier way of resolving the conflict. But Kant will say that no, that is not a necessary or inevitable way to handle the conflict. He said that any conflict between the two groups of people can be resolved if they talk to each other. So when there is a conflict between me and you, for example, there are two ways of resolving a conflict. One is that we can fight with each other. Whoever wins will get his or her way. And second way is that we can talk to each other. What is talking? In conversation, you can say talk, debate. I appeal to your rationality and you appeal to my rationality. I try to change your end and you try to change my end by rational appeal. And through that, we can arrive at a conclusion that can be acceptable to both of us. That is what is the diplomacy, that is what is the conversation, talk, debate. So he says that, well, human beings are rational, so it is always possible for us to solve a problem by rational deliberation, by rational discussion. So this is what he suggested that we can do. He said that if rationality does not succeed, then only violence happens. Somebody had said, there is a quotation of some philosopher that violence is the failure of man as a rational animal. When man as a rational animal fails, then violence happens. Violence is an animal method. Animals can solve a problem only by fight. We have other faculty inside us that we can talk to each other and still solve our problem. You don't have to fight. So fighting is always war is always a failure of the rationality. So let rationality give a chance. This is what he said. So it is always better to talk a problem out rather than fight a problem out. Talking out is always better than fighting out. So let people talk. But in order to talk to each other, we need a platform. League of Nations should provide that platform where representative of all the countries in the world should remain there and they can, well, talk about their concern, they can talk about their interest, they can talk about their end. So this is what he said. And almost 125 years after this book was published, well, a League of Nations was actually formed, which unfortunately did not succeed. Then after the Second World War, UNO was being formed under the similar principle. So many people consider, in philosophy at least, many people consider that Immanuel Kant was the intellectual father of the idea of the UNO. He was by the first person in the world, first intellectual in the world who tried to imagine something like an UNO and the role and function that UNO should play in making a peaceful world. Now, do you think, for example, UNO has played a very important role in making a peaceful world for last 75 years? Well, many of us might possibly say, yes, UNO has actually played a very important. Of course, UNO has not been 100% successful. So, there have been war again between Iraq and Iraq, Middle East, many war has been there between Iran, Iraq, Palestine and Israel, Ukraine war right now. India, Pakistan, India, China. So many such war has happened in the past 75 years. But one thing interesting is that all these wars have been localized war. Earlier war had a tendency to spread and become a world war. But now most of the war has that happened, even small scale war, much less casualty has been there. And even then war has been localized between a very small part of the thing. So Kant will say that one way to prevent the war could be empowering such an organization like UNO. Many people also say that by this what Kant meant that we should have more and more multilateral, intergovernmental organizations. Multilateral intergovernmental organizations. So he said that there should be more and more international cooperation, multilateral organization where different countries should work together. And for the last 75 years, there has been a proliferation of such organizations. So EU, for example, do you think that, of course, UNO is one of them, but other smaller organizations also like EU, for example, do you think that EU has played a very important role in making a peaceful Western Europe? Well, many of us may think that yes, EU has played a very, very important role. But then also there are large number of other organizations like, for example, NAFTA and SAFTA, or you can say the OPEC or ASEAN or the BRICS or SCO, or you can say the SARC, or you can see many such organizations, G20, G7, so many such, or African Union Organization, AUO. So a large number of such organizations has been there, and we believe that these organizations have actually played a better role in order to solve many such problems in the world and prevent or at least reduce the possibilities of war. This is what he suggested. There should be more and more such organizations. Such organizations will reduce the possibility of war, help the conflict resolution in a better manner, and make conflict more and more redundant as the time has passed. So this is what is the second important thing that he suggested, which we see is happening in the world today. So at the time of Russia-Ukraine war, where fell, UNO has not even been successful here, because that's why I already told you that we are not living in an ideal world that where UNO will be 100% success. I told about many other war also as that, but even in Russia and Ukraine, you know that it is a very localized war, that it is only within these two countries, and the casualty is much less in comparison to the similar casualty that used to happen 75 years ago. So carpet bombing is not there, civilians' death are much less in comparison to civilian death in the Second World War, and well, it has not spread to the other part of the world. It is still a localized war and low intensity war in a way. So that still is a success, you can say, to an extent. We are much far more, because war also is less lethal today than, though we have very lethal weapons today, but still war is less lethal today than it was 75 years ago. That may be one of the consequences of such organizations also. That is one important thing. Second important thing that he suggested. And then after third important thing that he suggested should be done was, he called that as universal hospitality. Universal hospitality. So what does that mean again? He said that universal hospitality means that every person in the world should have the freedom to go to any part of the world, move there, live there, as long as he is not carrying a gun and as long as he is not accompanied by an army. So this is what he said. If that is so, idea is that people should have the freedom of movement unless and until they are not harming others somewhere, they are not interested in say harming the interest of somebody else. In ancient India also we had a similar concept like universal hospitality. I hope that some of you may have already thought about it. In India we call that as things like Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. So that whole world is a family. Vasudha means world, Kutum means family. So whole world is a family. Kant also visualize a similar system where human race must be accepted as a family, where people should get the hospitality everywhere when they go there, unless and until they are not harming the interest of the common people publicly there, or they are not using somebody else merely as a means to achieve their own personal end. So this is what, well, he said. Now, next important question that comes up is that what is the most common purpose for which people move from one part of the world to the other part? Well, you all know about that, basically for livelihood. So, livelihood is the most important cause reason for which people often move. So, by this, you can say people believe that what Kant said was meant was basically we must promote international trade. Must promote international trade and commerce. Trade and commerce, he claimed, and many other people also claim similarly, will play a very important role in making a peaceful world. Now, what is the idea of a trade? The idea of a trade is that the basic idea, central idea of the trade is that other person is more beneficial to me alive than when he is dead. Now, this is an interesting way to understand trade. Idea of the trade is that, suppose for example, suppose I have some, so you have something which I want from you. Now, there are two ways through which I can take this thing from you. One is that I can fight with you, and at the end of it, if I am strong enough, powerful enough, then I can defeat you, I can kill you maybe, and take anything that I want from you. We call this as war. Now, war often is, we often say that war is a negative sum activity. Negative sum activity or a zero sum activity. A negative sum or a zero sum activity. What is the meaning of the term negative sum activity? Negative sum activity means that in a war, that gain of one party is always at the loss of the other party. So, if you sum it together, then it will become 0 at the best case, otherwise mostly it will become negative. Total sum of gain in the war is always 0. Cost, loss, you can say benefit, gain of war is equal to the mostly loss or less than the loss of a war. So, overall it becomes negative. This is called negative sum. That is one way to handle something, take something from you. Now, there is a second way also through which I can take the same thing from you. Second way is that I can tell you, okay, please give this to me, I urgently want what you have, but in place of that, I will give something to you that you like. Now, in this case, I can take something from you which I like, and in place of that, I can give something that you want, that you like. So, this is what we call the trade. Trade is often a positive sum activity. In the trade, both the parties often gain. There is no loss that any party. So, I gain what I want, you gain what you want. So, remember, basic purpose of both trade and war is same. In both the case, war and trade, we try to take advantage of the other person. Now, we want to take something from the other person which we want in both of them. But in the case of war, the total sum is always negative, and in the case of trade, total sum is always positive. Both of them have the same purpose, but well, the result differs. So, he say that if you promote trade, then people are rational, people will always recognize that, well, trade is always better than war. Why to fight if you can take the same advantages by trading the other person with much less cost to that. So, trade is always more beneficial than war, fulfilling the same purpose that war fulfills. Just think of it. East India Company, when they came to India, East India Company, well, they fought many wars. They fought many wars. Of course, purpose was what? They want to take maximum advantage from India. So, they take lots of advantage, but that advantage that they took was at tremendous cost to India. So before East India Company, Britishers came to India, India was one of the richest countries in the world. So during the peak of Mughal Empire, it was said that Indian GDP was almost 24% of the GDP of the world. Huge GDP we had. And when they left, then we were not even 2% GDP of the world. So that whatever they gained, Britishers from India, well, it was at a huge cost to India. That was basically a suppressed method of war. Now, today you can see that many big organizations like Google, Facebook, Imagine, etc., they are getting much more profit than, well, East India Company would have ever imagined. Much more profit, much more money that they are earning from India. And they are earning that much of profit and money without shedding a single drop of blood. So, and in doing that, they are not actually harming our interest also. We also get benefit in that. It's not that we are paying the cost only. So, we also get lots of benefit from them, well, when they take some benefit. Both of us we are also becoming better, and these big corporates are also becoming better. So, both of them are gaining in this trade that we have today, trade culture that we have today, and in East India Company, they gained a lot, suffered also, and we only suffered in that case, gained very little in the process. So trade is always better than war. This is what he said. He said that if you promote trade, then well, it will automatically reduce the possibility of war. Trade always reduces the possibility of war. So here we can make a second similar correlation, that probability of war or international conflict between any two countries in the world, the probability of war will be inversely proportional to the amount of trade that exists between these two countries. So more is the trade, less is the possibility of war, less is the trade, more will be the possibility of war. That is why we often say that between China and America, there might not even, it will be next to impossible that there will be war between China and America. Between USSR and USA, war was a possibility because trade was very less in them. But between China and America, trade is so high, volume of trade, that it is almost impossible that there will be posturing, there will be small skirmishes maybe, but there will not be any war. So, because trade is so high that there will be strong pressure on both the countries to refrain from full-scale war. So, between any two countries in the world, if the trade volume is high, possibility of war is often less. So, this is what he suggested, third important thing. So, today we often talk about the global, this is what people are suggesting in South Asia also. They may say that if you want to make a more peaceful South Asia, then we should promote trade between India and Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, etc. We should allow the people-to-people contact and interaction. If there is a people-to-people contact, then we will know that Pakistani people are not so bad as they are portrayed, and they will also know that Indians are not so bad as it is portrayed by their politicians. So people know each other, that they are beneficial, and ultimately all the problems will automatically become less and less intense, and maybe at the end of it they can be resolved also. So allow the trade, it will create that positive environment where there will be a possibility, a easy possibility of resolution of all the conflict that can say afflict these countries. So today we often talk about global village. Many people say that Kant was perhaps the first important person who talked about the importance of moral basis of the global village, role of the global village in making a peaceful world. So this is the third thing that he talked about, international trade, promote that. So these are the three important conditions that he suggested, that if you fulfill these three conditions, then we can make a comparatively peaceful, perpetually peaceful world. Along with that, among the 5 principles that I mentioned earlier, he suggested one small thing further, one thing in that, which I would like to talk about. He said that one more thing that has to be done, that should be done, is that every country in the world should respect the international border. Should respect the international border. So no country in the world, that is his suggestion, I am quoting him, no country in the world should try to unilaterally and forcefully change the international border. So we should respect the international sovereignty of each nation. That is the next one more important thing that we are talking about. And for the last 50 years, you can see 75 years, international border has remained more or less constant. Just look at Europe, for example, during the First World War, Second World War, it's during that period, first half of the 20th century and before that for many hundred years, every year some change in the international map used to happen. That there was a war and some city was annexed by that country, that country. Every year some change in the international border used to happen. But for last 75 years after the Second World War, more or less the international map has remained fixed. No change in the border has happened, and can't believe personally perhaps that if we promote trade, then their need to change the international border will become redundant. Why do the countries try to change the international border? Because we want to grab land and economic consequence of that land, we will get benefit from that. But if we promote trade, then we will have the same advantage without fighting a war and paying the cost of occupation. Occupation is costly, remember. So if we have, you can say, promote trade, then occupation will become unnecessary. We can have more advantage without paying a cost. We can take more benefit without paying the cost of occupation, cost of military cost, or you can say cost of suppression and all those things. So if we promote trade, then need to change the international border will become redundant. So this is what he said. So these are the things that he suggested that we should talk about, which if you promote these things, then we can make a better world. And these things have been promoted for the last 75 years and that have played an important role in order to make a comparatively peaceful world. And if we want to make a more peaceful world in the future, then, well, more peaceful world in the future, then we should promote these things further. That is what we can say here. Now, there was a question, one more question that somebody had asked. Let me take that question after the break. Biswajit had asked the question. That was an interesting question that I can take up. In current situation in India, there was no freedom of media in India. So, slowly democracy to autocracy. Yes, Biswajit, many people. So many people do believe that you can say this is the case. That's why I told you the data that I gave you about democracy was older data. That was the reason, because for last 10 years, many democracy watchers believe that there is a democratic backslide, not only in India, but most of the world also, particularly because of the rise of the right-wing populist leaders. Leaders like Donald Trump in America, Boris Johnson in Britain, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Victor Orban in can say the Hungary, or Erdogan in Turkey, Narendra Modi in India. These are all right-wing populist leaders. So they are strong leaders again, and rise of these leaders had actually reduced the democratic tendency in the world everywhere, even in America and Britain. There is a democratic backslide. In India, it is more so. So many people say that for last 10 years there is a democratic backslide. But we do believe that, well, democracy will fight back. Democracy will emerge stronger after some. Donald Trump was actually, you can say, defeated. Boris Johnson had to resign. Bolsonaro was defeated. So we believe that, yes, these, you can say, the right-wing tendency will be a temporary phase. That democratic backslide that is existing in the world today, it might be a temporary phase. Democracy may possibly re-emerge. Otherwise, it might be unfortunate for the world. So there is a democratic backslide, that is a fact. But we hope it is a temporary phase only. Otherwise, it will have a serious consequence for the world. Now, before we end this whole topic, one small thing further I would like to talk about. Important thing, the sort of summary of that. You know, today we talk about that an international world order. We talk about international world order. Now, if you look at the world order, international world order, then you will see that how this world order actually emerged in the last 100 years. You know, in the second quarter of the 20th century, you can see that after the First World War, there were three competing ideologies were there, which were trying to shape the world in its own ideological color. Let's talk about these three ideologies. One ideology was fascism. Now, what was fascism? Fascism is that ideology which says that the center of the moral discussion, moral world, moral evaluation must always be a single entity called the nation. Nation is the only entity, only you can say that the moral entity that matters in the moral life. So, the idea here is that we know that we have many identities inside for us, that we have identities that we are, you can say, of course, Indian or a non-Indian. We have identity of being Hindu or religious identity, Hindu or Muslim, caste identity, okay, say upper caste or this caste, or gender identity, male or female, regional identity, North Indian or South Indian, or can say or Tamil or Bengali. We have the linguistic identity, like again Tamil or Bengali speaking people. So we have many identities inside us and we are proud of all these identities. Now, fascism is that system in which a person is required to give up all his identities and assume only one identity that matters, and that is the national identity. So, national identity must supersede every other identity. Every other identity must be put in private domain subservient. Nation alone matters. So, only thing that matters for you is that you are an Indian. Being Hindu and Muslim, you must move aside. Being you can say Tamil or Bengali must be kept aside. That is not important. That must not be emphasized. It must be de-emphasized. Other identities, and only emphasis should be put on the national identity, and every moral judgment must be done with reference to the nation only. So, which can say poem is good, well, that the one that praises a nation is good and that is against the nation is bad. Which you can say which film is good, which song is good, which you can say which novel is good. Well, everything, which sculpture is good, which painting is good, the one which praises the nation is good and that is against the nation is bad. What is beauty? Well, nation will decide that. Everything should be decided with reference to the nation. And anybody who is against the national interest in that sense are bad people and they should be killed. On that ground, 6 million Jews were killed by Hitler because they were considered to be against the German national interest. And almost equal number of non-Jews, the Slavs, the Romans, deformed people, disabled people, people with very low IQ, they were all considered to be against the German national interest, that they pollute the German national nation. So, because of that, they must be killed. 12 million people were killed by the Hitlers just because they did not conform to the national identity that Hitler tried to promote. So, that is how fascism can be defined. And what is a nation? Nation is defined in terms of a territory first of all, and ethnicity second, and then after certain religion, then after certain you can see the national symbol like the national anthem, national flag, etc. And most importantly the national leader. Most importantly the national leader. So that is what you can say the national identity will mean. That is what fascism is. By the end of the Second World War, fascism as an ideology was dead. It was defeated. Then after for the next 45 years, starting from 1945, well, there was a competition between the two remaining ideology. One of them was communism. One of them was communism. Now, what is the communism? Again, I will not, as in the case of fascism, here also, I will not go into the political and economic aspect of the communist ideology. We are talking only about the moral aspect. So, the moral aspect of communism is that communism as an ideology says that only identity that matters for you is your class identity, which is represented by the Communist Party. So, just as in that case, in the case of fascism, all other identities you have to give up, only identity that you can assume is national identity. Here also, all other identities that you may take claim of is unnecessary. They are bad identity. Only identity that matters for you, that which class you belong to, proletariat or bourgeois. Every other identity must be subservient to that identity. So even national identity is less important than the class identity. That's why you can say, they said, communists said, for example, a worker in US, you can say in China is closer to, in terms of his identity interest, for example, is closer to a worker in America than a neighbor who is a capitalist. So the whole world can be divided into two parts. One is worker and the other is capitalist, proletariat and bourgeois. All other identity must be subsumed by this single identity. That's why they said the worker of the you can say Laborers of the world unite. So whole world has to be united in terms of a class conflict. That is the only conflict that is important here. And class interest is represented by the Communist Party. And anybody who is against the class interest and the Communist Party, they are the bad people, and bad people must be killed. So on the name of class enemy, well, millions of people were killed in the communist country like China, USSR, or Cambodia, etc. So that is what communism as an ideology was. Now by the, I can say, in 1989 and 91, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and dismantling of the USSR, well, communism as an ideology, world ideology is also dead. So today China is a big communist country, but it is not a world ideology. China does not have the ambition to make the world communist. It does not want to propagate communism. USSR wanted that. USSR wanted to convert the whole world into communism. It wanted to propagate it. It wanted to export communism as a world ideology. China is, well, limiting communism only in its own country, not outside that. Because of that, it is no longer a world ideology to dominate the world. So in 91, maybe 30 years ago, communism also as an ideology is dead now. Then after today, you can say only one dominant ideology is there in the world, that is the liberal, we call that as liberal democratic ideology. Now in liberal democratic system, what do you think? What should be the system of the world, you can say the moral world? In this case, it was the center of the moral world was nation, class. What should be the center of the moral world, moral consideration? Every identity should draw from what? Well, liberal democratic ideology, I hope that some of you may have thought about, it is individual. The only identity that matters in this case is the individual. All identity gets their sustenance, their strength from their justification from the individual identity. It is something like this. The way I like to understand it can be something like this one. Suppose, for example, this is the world, then at the center of the world is the individual. And every right action must be, you can say, right and wrong must be decided with reference to the individual. So, for example, if you are confused which religion is good, Hinduism is good or Islam is good or Christianity is good, ask the individual. If the individual says that Hinduism is good for him. And if the individual says Islam is good for him. Every other identity. What is beauty? Ask the individual. What novel is good? Ask the individual. What poetry is good? Ask the individual. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That is liberal ideology. Voter knows everything. That is the liberal ideology. So every source of moral judgment must come from the individual, must be with reference to the individual. This is what we call the liberal democratic ideology, liberal democratic world order. So finally, as a summary of all of that, if you look at the liberal democratic world, so liberal democratic world order can be defined in terms of these basic principles. First important principle is the protection of human rights. Individual. Supremacy of the individual, centrality of the individual, number one. Second important thing, extension of that promotion of democracy. We have seen that. Third one, international cooperation. Things like UNO, etc., etc. Fourth, we have seen was international trade and commerce. And fifth will be respect for the national sovereignty. That is respecting the national border. Should not change the unilateral and forceful change of the national border should be prohibited. So there are the 5 important principles that defines the liberal democratic world order in today's time. This is what is the international relations. There is a whole topic in your course that ethical issues in the international relations. These are the important ethical issues that we are trying to promote as centerpiece of the international relation, and we believe on the basis of Kantian assumption maybe that if we promote these things, then we can make a much better world, more peaceful coexistence. So that is how we can understand the international system that we have today. So that is all about the international system. Now, next important thing that I would like to briefly talk about further is next important thing that I will try to talk about is the political aspect of the Kantianism. So, in a Kantian theory, what should be the role of the state? What should be the role of the state? The governance. So, though Kant himself was not a political philosopher as such, during the end of his life, he did try to write some political questions also. So, we do believe that he had perhaps some plan in his mind to write a fourth critique also. I told you earlier that he wrote three critiques. Critiques of pure reason, that was a pure philosophical work in metaphysics and epistemology. Critique of practical reason was in its works on ethics. Critique of judgment was the work of aesthetics. And some people believe that he had the plan to write a fourth critique also towards the end of his life, the critique of political reason. But unfortunately, he could not write this book because by the end of his life, towards the end of his life, after Perpetual Peace that he wrote, well, he started losing his mental balance. He started suffering from Alzheimer's and many other, mental problems. So his thought becomes more and more incoherent after that. So he did write a few more things after that, but that was very incoherent thing, difficult to make sense of what he was writing. He used to dictate that, and many people used to transcribe. Nobody knows that what he dictated and what was actually transcribed. So towards the end of his life, his thought became more disoriented. So, but still, many of the Kantians have tried to use the same ideas that we have discussed earlier to create a political system also based on the Kantianism. So, let us talk about what should be the role of the state in the Kantian philosophy. But before we talk about Kantian state, can you tell me what should be the role of a state in a utilitarian society? Suppose, for example, if you make a society purely on the basis of utilitarian principle, then what should be the function of that society, that government? Well, it should be welfare and development of the majority. So that is the first important thing that the government should be doing. Majority is happiness for the majority, greatest happiness for greatest number, utilitarian concept. Now, what should be the role of the state in a purely libertarian society? Well, it should be the protection of individual liberty, which means only two things: the assurance of the non-aggression and enforcement of the contract. And on this ground, what do you think should be the purpose of the Kantian state? Well, I hope that some of you may have thought about it on the basis of our discussion in today's class and yesterday. Well, Kantian state must aim at promoting the human dignity, or which we call the human rights. Human dignity or human rights. So that should be the purpose of the Kantian state, as we have seen in, as we can appreciate. Now, how can this dignity and human rights can be formulated in terms of government policies and all? Now, think of it, a few important examples of India. Almost 10 years ago, 11 years ago, the Parliament has passed a Food Security Act, Right to Food Act. Now, under that act, it was the duty of the government, central government, to provide free and highly subsidized food to the poorest of the poor people in the society who cannot afford the food otherwise. Now, what do you think a libertarian will say about that? Should the state provide subsidized food to the poorest or free food to the poor people in the society? Well, I hope that you can answer this question easily, that a libertarian will say that no, it is not job of the government. It does not fall under the two criteria of the government actions: contract enforcement and the non-violence, the non-aggression. So, in this case, you can see that the libertarian will say that no, the state should not do that. But a Kantian will say that yes, it is the duty of the state, because a certain amount of food security is important in order to ensure a dignified life of a human being. Similarly, do you think that the state should have an obligation to provide free or highly subsidized primary health care? primary health care to the poorest of the poor people who cannot afford health care otherwise. A libertarian will say no, but a Kantian will say yes, this is what state must provide. Or do you think that state should provide a certain amount of, you can say, primary or highly free or subsidized primary education in the society? Of course, libertarian will say that no, a Kantian will say yes. What is the importance of education in a Kantian society? You know, remember Mill also within the utilitarian framework, Mill also tried to support the universal education. But what was the purpose of the Mill support? Mill supported universal education on the ground of, well, higher pleasure. Education will make people, allow people, equip people to enjoy the higher pleasure. This is what Mill said. But Kant was not in favor of the pleasure as a basis of moral action. He said that education, he would say maybe, that education is important because education alone allows us to access those information on the basis of which we can make an autonomous decision. Right to information is important for that reason. So, because only through information people can make it. Remember, Kantian dignity is based on our autonomy, our ability to make a choice, which is dependent on how much information you have. Education allows us to access those information which are necessary. Uneducated people are more likely to be manipulated by others, well, in order to take a decision that they otherwise would not make. Education is important for that. Or do you think that one of the duty of the state is to provide some sort of employment guarantee? Like MG Narega, for example, libertarian will say that no, but Kantian will say yes, that is important. Because all of these things are important part of a dignified life. It is the duty of the state to provide all of that. The idea is that one way to understand this whole thing that we have discussed here is that Kant will say that we might possibly say as something like this one. Suppose, for example, let us agree on some, suppose this is the increasing standard of living, and we might possibly say let us agree on some basic rights. Some basic rights like right to food, right to education, right to information, right to health care, right to employment, etc., etc. Let us agree on some basic rights. And suppose there is a person in society who is so poor that very low level, then this person should be brought up to that level in the society by the government assistance, some subsidies, some food, etc. Or suppose, for example, somebody is that poor, he should also be brought about here. Somebody is that poor, he should also be brought about here. So everybody in the society should be brought up to that level. After that, give liberty to the people. After that, give liberty to the people. And under that liberty, suppose this person works very hard and he becomes very rich, and he does not work that hard and he remains poor, then that type of inequality is justified. Remember, this leads to the equality question debate also. Suppose, for example, in a society, this person is that rich and he is that poor. Is that morally justified according to libertarian? A libertarian will say that it might be justified if his wealth is ethical, or based on those two fairness, the initial acquisition or exchange. That is unjustified. But Kant will say that this type of inequality may not be justified. So, for example, that if you but if we bring this person to that level and he remains poor, then this type of inequality is justified. But this inequality is not justified. It is the duty of the state to bring everybody up to that level where, well, everybody can, well, live a life of human dignity. Beyond that, liberty is important. That should be protected, that should be promoted, that should be ensured. That is what a Kantian theory will say here. So it is on this ground that many people, support things like UBI, universal basic income. Kantian theory can give a philosophical basis of that. Everybody in the society should be given some basic guarantee of income by the government. Then after, give them the freedom, give them liberty. A few months ago, 6-7 months ago maybe, or 1 year now, there is a lawyer in Supreme Court of India, Rohan J. Alwar. He had written a beautiful book again. This book is, I am not suggesting or recommending you to read that book, but I will take the name of that book here. This book is actually on the history of Article 21 of the Constitution. So, it is a very detailed book. Again, you do not have to go into that much of detail about Article 21 of the Constitution alone, but name of that book is itself very, very good. Name of that book is, well, Liberty After Freedom. Forget about the book or topic. This word is itself important. Liberty after freedom. So we see here that liberty becomes meaningful only and only when freedom is ensured. Freedom is Kantian dignity. So suppose, for example, so this is the freedom level. Suppose somebody is extremely poor who is dying of hunger, and you tell that person you have so much of liberty in the society, perhaps he will hate you. He will tell you, give me food first, then after I will think about liberty. So liberty is important for us, we people, because we are normally better off. We are guaranteed that we will have a food tomorrow maybe, but those people who have no guarantee that they will be able to eat something in the night and tomorrow, who have no house to live in, do you think that liberty is of any meaning for that person? Liberty may be theoretically present, but it is meaningless. We will be able to exercise our liberty only and only when certain basic freedom is guaranteed, and that is the duty of the state. State must guarantee that basic freedom. So this is what we say on the Kantian theory. State must provide, everybody must ensure everybody should be up to that level of basic rights. Only then liberty will become meaningful. Yesterday I talked about that beautiful quotation of Mark Twain, that morality is like art, is just about drawing a line. Society also must draw a line that nobody should be below this line. Everybody should be brought up to that line, then after, well, leave them how they want to live their life. But if somebody is below that line, then it is unethical. Society has to work in order to bring that person up to that level. This is what a Kantian suggestion might possibly be. Now, what do you think Kant will say about taxation? Remember, a libertarian say that taxation is wrong. So a libertarian say taxation is wrong. But what do you think a Kant will say about the taxation? Of course, Kant will say that taxation may be, a little taxation may be justified. So not very high taxation, but a moderate taxation may be justified. There can be a question on the moral basis of taxation. So here we can talk about three ideas. A utilitarian will say taxation is justified for the sake of welfare. Libertarian will say taxation is 100% wrong on the name of liberty. And Kantian will justify a certain level of taxation on the basis of human, for the sake of human dignity. So for the sake of human dignity, this is what we will say. So finally we can say, if you compare the liberty and dignity of Kant, then we can say here that suppose, for example, if this is the circle of liberty, then this might be the circle of dignity. Dignity. So most of the things you can say libertarians and dignitarians. Remember, Kantians are also called dignitarians sometimes now. So for most of the things, libertarians and dignitarians may agree together, but there is some conflict between them also. Some actions are supported by libertarians as justified, but for Kantians, dignitarians, unjustified. Justified by dignitarians like Kant and unjustified by the libertarians. What are these? Well, you can think of. These actions will be like suicide, prostitution, casual sex, pornography, or sale of organs, surrogacy, etc., etc. So all of these things are right according to libertarian, but wrong according to Kantian. And well, these things will be all those rights, basic rights, taxation, etc., etc. So that is how libertarian and Kantianism can be compared together, can be put together in one framework. So that is what we can think about. In contemporary time, educated people are manipulated by political leaders. It's not, yes, it is their fault, they are not using their rationality. So education at least gives them opportunity. It's something that they have the ability, but they are not using it. It is something like you have food, but you are dying of hunger. So having no food and then die of hunger is acceptable. But food is there with you, but still you die of hunger, that's your stupidity then. So educated people are stupid people in that case. They do not use their education to make the better decision. They allow themselves to be manipulated. Kant will say it is your fault then. So at least you have the ability to get this, and that ability is important. Not whether you exercise that ability or not. We must equip everyone. This is what Kant will say. Then after, let them decide whether they want to be manipulated or not. So this is what Kant will say. Now, before we end this topic, a few more things I will like to talk about. This thing I might have talked about in the previous section itself when I ended my Kantian discussion. If you look at the whole of Kantian theory that we discussed till previous class, before perpetual peace, then you can see that Kantian theory is one very simple theory in a way, in a personal life again. Forget about the world, political and international domain. If you look at personal life, then we can say Kantian theory is a very simple theory in that sense, that this theory simply tells us that whenever we have a moral dilemma, then in order to solve the moral dilemma, we do not have to go to somebody else. How do you solve the moral question? Well, sit quietly, Kant will say, close your eyes and look inside. You will find inside you what Kant may possibly say a voice of reason, which Gandhi called a voice of conscience. Voice of reason or a voice of conscience. So, so listen to that voice that will guide you what is right and wrong. Something like sapre or de, appadipo bhava. That deep, that lamp, that light is inside us. Look inside and you will find the answer. But the problem is that this voice of reason is a very feeble voice, very weak voice. It is often drawn into the, well, dark cloud of darkness in a way. What are those clouds? What are those noise that you can say clouds the the voice of reason? Well, they are inclinations, our greed, love, anger, fear, hatred, etc., etc. So compassion, sympathy. So all of these are the cloud inclinations which cloud our judgment, which cloud our reason. So because of that, you have to remove all of these things. If you remove all of these things, then finally you will get a, that voice of reason. And whatever that voice of reason or voice of conscience tells you, just do that. That will be right for you, with only one exception. What is that exception? When you listen to your voice of reason, then always respect the similar voice of reason of others as well. Respect the similar voice of reason of others as well. Everybody else has a voice of reason similarly. So you must listen to your voice of reason, but you should not undermine others' voice of reason in a similar fashion. This is what Kant will say. Now this is what we call autonomy, and this is what you may call as categorical imperative. Listen to your mind, your reason, autonomy. Respect others' reason, autonomy, that is categorical imperative. Autonomy, as we have seen earlier, allows us to choose our end, and categorical imperative allows us to choose our means. Categorical imperative allows us to choose our means. Now, this debate between end and means is an interesting debate in the modern philosophy. There are two viewpoints are there about the end and the means. Some people say that end justifies the means. Now, can you tell me which philosophy will say end justifies the means? I hope that you may have the answer. It will be the utilitarian philosophy. Utilitarianism is about end justifies the means. End is what? Consequence. If the consequence is good, then any action is justified by that. All is well if end is well. That is utilitarian philosophy. Now, the opposite philosophy is that means justify the end. So, this is the second philosophy, alternative philosophy opposed. This is what Kant will say. Kant will say end will become justified only and only when you use the right means. That's why I told you that they can say capital punishment is right, but how do you give the punishment is more important than what punishment you give. So, means justifies the ends. Means is more important in the Kantian theory. Kantian theory is a theory of means. Morality is more about means that will ultimately justify the end. Means are more important in the Kantian philosophy. Suppose, for example, I want to earn money, lots of money. There are two ways that I can earn the money. One is that I can cheat people, manipulate people, harm people, rob people. And second thing is that I can help people to achieve their end and I take money in return from them. Well, in the first one it is wrong because end is same in both the case. I earned money, but in the first case means will be wrong. In the second case means will be right. So, means are more important. Autonomy is about end and categorical imperative is more about the means. Autonomy, if you look at it, is more about our rights and categorical imperative is more about our duty. Categorical imperative is more about our duty. So rights and duties are very closely related to each other, as all of you know. Every right has a commensurate set of duty. So what I do in my life is my right, but well, what I do to you is my duty. I have a right to respect, I have a right to do whatever I want, and I have a duty to respect whatever you want. Every right and duties are the two sides of the same coin. One person's right is somebody else's duty. So for example, I have a right of freedom of expression, but I have a duty to respect your right of your freedom of expression as well. I have a right to follow my religion, but I have a duty to respect your right to follow your religion as well. So that this duty is what categorical imperative defines, and this right is what you can say the autonomy defines. And combined together we can call this, that this is, some people also call this as a private morality and this as the public morality. So morality has two aspects, private aspect and the public aspect. So what I do in my life is my private life, but the moment in order to do what I want to do, if I start using you as a means, then it becomes a public life. And then after categorical imperative comes into play. So public life is determined by the categorical imperative and private life is more about the autonomy. This is how the two sides of the morality can be contrasted, autonomy and categorical imperative. This is what Kant will say. And if you want to compress both of them into a single concept, then we'll say that both of these two things are just about a single thing, that is the reason. Respect reason inside you and inside everyone else. Reason has an expression in our mind and reason also have expression in the mind of everybody else. You must respect reason in us and you must also respect reason in everybody else as well. So that is what Kantian theory was all about, that we have discussed earlier. That is all about the Kantianism. Kantian philosophy in our personal life, political domain and international domain. Now, before we end this whole topic and go to the next important theory of ethics that we have to discuss, one more thing I would like to briefly talk about. That now, if you look at ethics till now, then you may appreciate that ethics is a highly controversial issue. That lots of controversy has been there in the world about the questions of morality. Now, if you look at any controversy in any society, big controversy that has happened about the morality, then almost all the controversies are ultimately about the two types of moral arguments. So, there are, we will say, two types of moral There are two types of moral arguments, well, about which people often differ and they often have a very severe disagreements about how the morality should be understood or decided. So let's briefly, we have talked about both of these two arguments in our class, but let us have some sort of contrast and synopsis of both of them. Two types of moral arguments are possible are often there in the moral philosophy. Let's talk about both of them. First argument, of course, is called consequentialist aspect. Now, we all know about this argument already, that consequentialist argument is what? It says that no action is right and wrong in itself, and action becomes right and wrong in comparison to the consequence that it produces. If the consequence is good, action is right. Consequence is bad, action will be wrong. So that is the only way to, so actions become right and wrong in proportion to the consequence that they produce. This is the consequentialist argument. In our class, we have taken Jeremy Bentham as a representative of the consequentialist argument. Though there are many other consequentialist philosophers are also there, but Bentham was an extreme consequentialist. He thought that only consequence matters, nothing else matters. So this is what Bentham was the extreme consequentialist in that case. A second type of argument that we talk about is the deontological argument. Deontological argument. Now, deontological argument is just opposite of the consequentialist argument. This argument tells us that, well, no acts, you can say consequence do not matter, forget about the consequence. Well, some actions are by nature right. As a rational person, we should identify that nature and then after just do it. Forget about the consequence. Some actions are by nature wrong. Identify that as a rational person and just don't do it. Forget about the consequence. That is what is the deontological argument. Deontological argument, if you look at the word deontology, then deontology word has been derived from the word deon. Deon means duty. Deon is a Latin word which means duty. And this word duty has two meanings. First of all, duty as an act and duty as a motive. So, we must perform our duty, but we must make duty our motive for performing our duty as well. So, your duty as a student is to study, but the study should be your motive also. You should study not because you like or hate it. You should study because it is your duty to study. So, you should study and make study your motive also. That is what we call the duty, two aspects of duty. In our class, of course, we have taken Immanuel Kant as a representative of the idea of deontology. Though there are large number of other deontological thinkers are also there, but we believe that Kant was an extreme deontologist, just like and Bentham was an extreme consequentialist. Similarly, Kant was an extreme deontologist. So there are two opposite ideologies there. Now, if you look at Indian ethics, then you can say from India, one of the greatest book of ethics that has come out in the world, well, is the Gita. I hope all of you are aware of the basic arguments of Gita. So Gita tells us also. So Gita, if you look at it, the whole of Gita is also a sort of debate between the consequentialism and deontology. Consequentialist argument in Gita is presented by Arjun. Arjun was a consequentialist person because whenever he opens his mouth, he always says that, well, he always talks about consequence. I should not fight this war. But why not? Because if I fight this war, so many people will die. My cousins may die, my brothers may die, my grandfather will die, my guru may die. So much of destruction will be there, so many people will die. So consequence is so bad, so I should not fight the war. That was a consequentialist argument. On the other hand, the deontological argument is presented by, well, deontological argument is presented by Krishna. So Krishna keeps on telling Arjun all the time that, well, don't worry about the consequence. So consequence may be good or may be bad, that is none of you for you to decide. Perform your duty, do your duty. Karmane vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. So Gita also says that you must perform your duty, well, even if your duty leads to such a devastating consequence like the Mahabharata war. Right, the thing must be done. So that is the deontological argument. So if you look at the Gita, basic Gita, then we'll see that there is this interesting parallel between the Kantian argument in the modern philosophy and Krishna's argument in Gita in a way. So both of them talk about similar thing. Kant also says in modern philosophy that our action must be non-inclined. He talks about non-inclined action, and Krishna also talks about, let me write a little Sanskrit. Nishkam karma, that is again the non-inclined action. So in this case, we can see there is a beautiful parallel between these two. So Kant also says that you must perform your action, but there must not be any inclination into that. That is what duty is. And Krishna also says you must perform your karma. That is not enough, but it must also be without any inclination, without any calm. Calm is what? Calm is inclination, calm is a desire, attachment that we have towards this. Kant also said further, this is one thing, duty in that case. Now, Kant also said, for example, that, well, morality will make you free. Morality will make you free. This is what Kant also said. And Krishna also says in Gita that yes, morality alone makes you free. What is the freedom in Gita? Well, Gita is actually shrouded into the religious mythology, religious worldview. So, if you remove the religious worldview, then you can understand that parallel. For example, in Hindu mythology, in which Gita is presented, in Hindu mythology, people believe the worldview is that every action that we perform, this action has a consequence which we'll have to pay in the next birth. So, in terms of the consequence of our actions, we are bound in the cycle of birth and rebirth. How can you break that cycle and be free from that? Well, by performing the Nishkam Karma. So, Krishna also said that if you perform Nishkam Karma, then, well, then consequence of your action will not stick to you. Consequence of your action will not influence you. That is what modern morality under the Kantian theory also says. Just think of it. Suppose there is a hangman. He kills a murder convict by hanging him. Do you think that he is morally responsible? Can you see that he is a murderer because he killed somebody? Of course not. His action has led to the death of the person, but he is not responsible morally because he has simply performed that with nishkam, in non-inclined. He has killed him not because he hates him, he has killed him because it was his duty to do that. He was a hangman. So, he was a hangman and his duty was to do that. So, without any inclination, he simply performed his duty. Consequence was bad that it led to the death, but he is not responsible for that. The same is with a soldier. When a soldier kills an enemy soldier on the battlefield, is he a murderer? No, he is not a murderer because he again does that with a non-inclined motive. That he kills that person not because he hates him, he kills because it is his duty to kill. So, if he does so, then consequence of his action will not create a moral burden on him. So, by performing non-inclined action, we can become free from the consequence of your action. The consequence may be good and bad, but it will not influence us, it will not stick to us, it will not create a moral burden on us. So, only way to become free from the moral burden, moral guilt, we have to perform our action with the motive of duty. This is what Krishna also says, this is what Kant also will say in the modern philosophy. So, that is the thing. Now, can you tell me out of these two arguments, which argument appears stronger to you, a better argument? Perhaps all of you may have thought about it. It will be, often people consider that deontological argument is much more powerful than the consequentialist argument. So, in Gita also ultimately, whose argument prevailed? The Krishna's argument actually prevailed in Gita. And Arjun had to accept that. And in modern philosophy also, though Bentham is a very important philosopher, no doubt about that, but Kant is often considered as a much more influential and important philosopher. We have already seen the impact of Kant in the world today. So, whenever there is a big debate between the consequentialism and deontology, it often appears that deontological argument is a better argument, is a stronger argument. Now, since deontological argument is such an important argument, so I would like to talk a little more about a deontological argument. Think of it. Deontological argument in other language says that there are certain values. This is deontological argument. Deontological argument tells us that there are certain values which must always be respected. It is our duty to respect them. So, these are the three important key words of deontological argument: duty, values and respect. Values that exist, our duty to respect that value. So, you must always respect that value regardless of the consequence. Even if the consequence is bad, then also you must respect those values. Why so? Because these values define us, who we are. So, if we disrespect those values, then our definition as a human being will be lost. We will become just like any other animal, which we should never allow us to be. You must allow us to degenerate into the, amoral kingdom, animal kingdom. You must remain in the kingdom of ethics, kingdom of end. So, and in order to do that, we must always, protect those values. That is what the ontological argument tells us. Let's take a small example to see that. A few years ago, there was a debate that I had seen on social media. This debate also was about Ajmal Kasab. Now, Ajmal Kasab, when he was arrested and he was put in jail, then many people said that a lot of money was spent on him, and that was a fact. A lot of money was spent on his food, in his clothing, in his safety or security, legal cost, etc., etc. Now, many people say that why are we spending so much of money on a terrorist like him? So, this money could have been used for a better purpose. Now, if there is a question like this for you, from you, that is it right, was it justified for us to spend so much of money on a terrorist like him? Well, I hope that you have the answer. Our answer should be unqualified yes. It was justified. Why it was justified? This is where the deontological argument comes up. So in this case, we have to be very clear and we have to say here that this money that we spent was not on him. We often misinterpret the situation. We did not spend money on him. He was a bad person. There is no debate about that. Who says that he was a good person? He was a terrorist. Everybody agrees on that. So we do not spend that money on him as a person. We spend this money on our value system, which is our duty to respect that. And what is that value? That constitutional value, the the human rights and all. So we spend this money not on him. We spend that money on our value system. Here the important question is not who he is. That question is answered. He is a terrorist. So the important question is not who he is. More important question is who we are. It's our identity that is at stake, and nothing is more important than protecting our. We are not ISIS. ISIS people kill their enemy in the public square without any trial. We are well-moral state. We have a high standard to maintain. So it is about our standard that was the question here. And we spent money on maintaining our standard of morality in the society. We often say that moral standard of a society is measured not by how do you treat your great person. Everybody can say respect the great person. Gandhi, for example. So moral standard of a society is not measured in terms of how do you treat your great person. Moral standard of society is measured by how do you treat your worst person. That is what. So that minimum line that we talked about yesterday. Morality is all about drawing a line. Society must always draw a line that even a person like Ajmal Kasab should be treated up to that line. And if we spend money on that, that is justified. So this is what a deontological argument tells us. So this is how we can understand these both types of arguments. So that is all about the deontological theory. So today's class, yesterday's class was essentially about the explanation of deontological theory. So that is all about Kantianism, its influence, various aspects of Kantianism and all. Now next we will talk about the other very important theory of ethics further, which is very different from almost all the theories that we have discussed in our class till now. And this theory is known as existentialism. Another very important theory of ethics, well, in the recent time, modern time. So rest of the time class today and a little of tomorrow's class we will discuss about the existential philosophy. So let's talk about what exactly existentialism means. Now existentialism, as we will see, was an extreme. Oh, before that let me take some. I think there was a question. There was a question, sir, how we understand what is the other region, what have other mind? Well, they can tell us. You must trust them. So, for example, yesterday I gave you the example of that coffee wala, that if you use your region to have a cup of coffee, autonomous end, then you must respect his end. He tells you that, okay, I want us to earn 10 rupees or 20 rupees from that coffee. So, that is what is respecting others' end. So, ask other person what is your end, and then after decide on the basis of that. This is where the interaction, rational interaction comes up. So ask a coffee wala, I want a cup of coffee from you, but you tell me what do you want. And he tells you, I want 20 rupees. That is his end now, his region, respect that. Simple. Existentialism. Now existentialism, as I was telling you, was a very influential theory of ethics during the middle of the 20th century. Starting from the late 1930s, 1940s, 50s, 60s and 70s. So these 45 years, this theory was an extremely influential theory in the world. And till the time, the founder of this theory actually died in 1980. And who that person was? Well, that person was John Paul Sartre. Sorry. Jean-Paul Sartre. Or other people are also there, people like Albert Camus, others. So existential philosophy was extremely influential theory in the middle of the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War. This theory got very high popularity among the philosophers as well as among the common people. So that was there. So there are large number of other philosophers are also there. Before Sartre, also there were many existential philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, or literature people like Fyodor Dostoevsky, Leo Tolstoy. So there are other people also. After Sartre, also many other people were there. People like, or during Sartre also, like Martin Heidegger, Simone de Beauvoir, so Monty Porlet, can say Monty Porlet, or many other people, philosophers have been there. Many literature people also like James Joyce, Franz Kafka, Dostoevsky I already talked about. So it was a sort of movement in that case. We often call existential movement. And existentialism has a strong impact on not only on the philosophy, but even on literature, art, film, painting, music, every branch of human knowledge. This philosophy had a strong impact. So we often talk about existentialism not only as a philosophy, but existentialism as a movement. So a large number of philosophers were there who were existential philosophers, but the most important one was of course Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre was the person who actually coined this term existentialism. Before him, this idea was present, but this name did not exist as such a theory. So a scattered idea were present, he put all together and created existential, well, framework in a way. He defined the basic tenets of existentialism also. So he was the most important figure in the field of existential philosophy. Now, if you look at Sartre as a person, then Sartre, as I told you, he was the most important. He was born in 1905 and 75 years later, in 1980, he died. Now, Sartre was a very prolific writer. He was one of the most prolific writer in the history of philosophy. It is said about him that the rate at which he had written was around 20 pages. Think of it. 20 pages per day. That was the amount of writing that he has written throughout his life on an average. Of course, on the day he was born, he did not write anything. But if you average out that 20 pages per day, and he had a long life, 75 years. So imagine how many pages he has written. 75 years into 365 into 20. That many number of pages he has written. Was the most prolific writer perhaps in the history. He had written a book called The Family Idiots. That book ran into 2,801 pages, 3 volumes. He had planned to write a 4th volume of that book also. We know it because he has written in the preface of the 1st volume that he had planned to write a 4th volume also, which he could not write. Not because he got tired of writing. He did not write the 4th volume because he got blind. And he got blind not by writing, he got blind by overindulgence. He was a heavy drinker and a smoker. Whenever you see his photograph, you can have large number of photographs. Almost every photograph you will find a cigar either between his lips or between his fingers. So because of heavy drinking and smoking, towards the end of his life, he got blind. Even then, well, he had written around 20 pages per day. That was the amount of writing that Sartre had done. A very prolific writer. Initially, he writes some monumental books of philosophy like, for example, the Being a Nothingness, considered to be one of the greatest work of philosophy in the 20th century. But then after, in order to clarify his ideas, he shifted to fiction, novel. So he has written some of the most important and influential novel of the 20th century. Novels like, you can say, work of literature of the 20th century. Novels like, for example, Age of Reason, The Reprieve, Iron in the Soul, Trilogy. Or you can say the plays like, you can say, No Exit, Nausea. So he has written a number of beautiful work of literature, novel, plays, stories, etc., etc. And for his contribution to literature, he was given Nobel Prize also in 1965. But as far as I know, he was the only person in, you can say, in history of Nobel Prize who rejected Nobel Prize, saying that Nobel Prize does not deserve me. Normally we say whether we deserve the Nobel Prize or not. And here was a person who said, oh, I don't believe in such a small prize, saying that he rejected that. So that was the type of confidence, arrogance or self-confidence of these people in a way. So that was the personality of Jean-Paul Sartre. One of my students in my other class in Delhi asked me that, was he a Maharashtrian? I was surprised, how do you know that he was a Maharashtrian? Then he says that his name appears like that, Mahatre, Atre, Satre. Well, don't get confused. First of all, we don't call it Satre, we call it Sartre. R-E is virtually silent, Sartre. And he was not a Maharashtrian, he has no Maharashtrian connection, no Indian connection. He was a complete French man, born in Paris, died in Paris. So he was a French man, and existentially was essentially a French philosophy. Most of the important existential philosophers were French people. He himself, Simone de Beauvoir, his girlfriend or his lifelong living partner, or they did not marry, but they were great philosophers living in a living relation, very unique relationship they had. Albert Camus, etc. All of them were the French people. So he was Jean-Paul Sartre, and this was his philosophy. Let's talk about how his philosophy can be understood. Though remember, existentialism is also a very complex philosophy, but I will try to make it as simple as I possibly can. Let us see how much simplification we can do of this theory. Let's try to talk about that. Write down firstly, existential philosophy can be understood, ethics can be understood. Existential ethics can be understood in terms of three concepts. Existential ethics can be understood in terms of three concepts. So again, for the sake of simplicity, I am dividing it. These three concepts that I am talking about, in this sense, they are not what you will find in any standard book of existentialism. So it is just for the sake of convenience and simplicity. So at the end of at the root of the existential philosophy, there is only one concept is there. Just as in the case of Kantian, the whole of Kantian philosophy is rooted into a single concept. What is that single concept? Well, I hope that you got the answer. It was rationality. Rationality alone is important. Everything else about the Kantian theory is just about an offshoot of rationality. So here also we can see that there is only one concept at the root of existential philosophy, but for the sake of simplicity of understanding, we will talk about three concepts here. Towards the end, we will go to that one single concept also. So we can understand, for the sake of simplicity, this theory in terms of three fundamental concepts. What are they? First one is, write down, absurdity. Absurdity. So absurdity is often considered as the beginning of existential thought. Any existential philosopher, whether it be Soren Kierkegaard or Nietzsche, Sartre or others, Camus, any other existential philosopher, they always begin their philosophy by talking about something similar to absurdity. So what is absurdity and why it is considered to be the beginning of the existential thought? Without absurdity, existential thought will never exist. So it is the beginning of the existential thought, not the end, only beginning of existential thought. What is absurdity? Write down a few lines. According to them, the existential philosophers, according to them, there is no inherent meaning, purpose, there is no inherent meaning, purpose, or essence of human life. No inherent meaning, purpose, or essence of human life. There is nothing that can explain or justify the human existence. There is nothing that can explain or justify the human existence. this lack of an inherent meaning, purpose or justification of human life, this lack of an inherent meaning, purpose or justification of human life is called absurdity. Is called absurdity. So, this is how we can start our discussion of existential philosophy. The idea here is that this theory tells us, first of all, the idea before theory, if you look at us the human being, then one of the very important and distinctive characteristics of human being is that at around certain age, say around middle teenage, 16, 17 years of age, every human being starts asking such questions from himself or herself, that what is the meaning of my life, what is the purpose of my life, from where I came, where am I going, what is that I have to do in this life. We start asking some philosophical questions. Did you ask this question from yourself some few years ago, maybe during last few years? All of you must have asked this question. What is the meaning of my life? What is the purpose of my life? What defines me? Who am I? Why am I here? What happened before I came here on this world? What happened after that, after I will not be here? So, we always think about these larger questions about life. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? What is the essence of life? What is the justification for our life? What is it that I exist in this world for? So, you must have asked this question from yourself also sometimes. So, the next important question is that, did you get the answer of that question? Perhaps many of you may not have got the answer. Are you still trying to find the answer to that question, or you have given up? If you are still trying to find the answer to that question, then this topic today and a little of tomorrow will help you to get the final answer. Because this theory is just about that, finding out a sort of meaning and purpose. But if you look at deeply inside you, then you will see that at the end of it, our life does appear to be meaningless life. Just think of it, our place in this world. Just think in terms of, say, time. Just imagine, tell me, how old is the universe? According to scientists, it is around 14 billion years old, 13.8 or 7, when Big Bang happened. So, the universe is 14 billion years old. How old is the solar system? Around 8 billion years old. How old is the earth? Perhaps 7 billion years old. How old is the life on the earth? Maybe 4 billion years old. How old is the humanity in the world? A few million years old maybe. How old is the civilization? Around 10,000 years old. How old are we? Well, a few decades. So just look at our position that in this world. How long will you live in this world with the expanse of the total universe that has been there in the past and in the future. In this case, we are a speck of time maybe. So only for that small period we exist in this universe. Not only time, think about in terms of space. Just close your eyes and imagine that how large is the universe. In that universe, how small is our Milky Way? According to many scientists, there are 100 billion galaxies are there in the universe. Our Milky Way is one middle sized in a corner of the universe. So, how small is our Milky Way? Inside the Milky Way, how small is our sun? According to scientists, there are 100 billion suns are there, stars are there in the Milky Way itself. So, how small is our sun? Just in some corner of this small Milky Way. So, how small is the sun? And our solar system. In that solar system, how small is the earth? On that earth, how small are we? So, just imagine our size, a scale on which we exist in this world in comparison to the expanse of the universe. So, both in space and time, we are virtually nothing. So, where our existence is totally insane. We are not even like an atom in this whole universe. So, that is the space position that we have. Is it something for which we have actually born? Is there any meaning in that existence? So, in this large universe, large time that is there, well, our existence is totally meaningless, it is totally purposeless. Today I am here, tomorrow if I cease to exist, will it change the universe? Will it have some impact on the universe? Of course not. The only thing that some people around me will get sad for some time, but after that even they will get used to my non-existence. So that is what happens in that case. So we are actually non-existent in this world. This lack of meaning and purpose that we have, our place in this universe is so insignificant place, is what is called the absurdity. Life has no meaning in itself, life has no purpose in itself. In fact, there is a famous quotation of Jean-Paul Sartre, which I often use in my class. So these people have beautiful quotations that their quotations can beautifully be used to explain or understand their theory. There is a quotation of Sartre. He said that existence precedes essence. Existence precedes essence. These three words, many people say, summarizes the whole idea of existential philosophy. Existence precedes essence. Now, what does that mean? If you look at all other philosophers that we talked about earlier, all other philosophers start making an assumption, start their philosophy by making an assumption that there is something, some essence of human life. Essence means what? Basic characteristics, nature. And that nature should determine our existence. So Bentham said that our essence is that we always want happiness in the world. So our life must be based on our attempt to maximize the happiness in the world. Kant say that we are rational in our essence, so we must live our life existence on the basis of the rationally chosen principle of morality. So every philosopher make an assumption first, and on that assumption they create life conditions for us. This is what is called other philosopher. So they say that essence comes first and existence comes later. But these philosophers now that we are talking about in this class, they will reject that stipulation. They will say that no, existence comes first and essence comes later. We exist in this world without any essence. We exist in this world without any purpose, without any, you can see, without any meaning. And on the basis of the life that we live, we create our essence. Essence is the result of our existence. So at the birth, there is no meaning, there is no purpose, life is absurd. But that life, absurdity of life must be converted into an essence of life. That is where next important thing comes. So write down further, same point, change the paragraph and then after write further. But a life without a meaning and purpose, is a bad life. But a life without a meaning and purpose is a bad life. So, in order to lead a good life, we must create a meaning. We must create a meaning and purpose in our life. We must create a meaning and purpose in our life. So that is the next important thing. Idea here is that this theory tells us that such life of absurdity where there is no meaning and purpose is there, that is a bad life. Because we always try to find why should I live this life. There has to be a meaning and purpose of that. If there is no meaning and purpose, then it is better to die rather than to live. Now there is a beautiful quotation of Albert Camus, the second existential philosopher whose name I mentioned earlier. He had said that the only problem of philosophical significance before man is the problem of suicide. That we say that philosophers have been talking about so many big problems, metaphysics, epistemology, etc. All problems are insignificant. Only problem of significance before us is the problem of suicide. That why should I not commit suicide? Why should I live this life? So if there is no purpose for which life must be lived, then it is better to commit suicide, die, than to live. Human beings are the only animal who commit suicide. Even in the best of our condition, at one point of time, people start thinking life is meaningless. Life is a void. And in that sense of meaninglessness and void, people lose the motivation to live and they commit suicide. So human beings alone commit suicide. If there is no meaning and purpose, then people may prefer to die rather. There is a beautiful quotation, or you can say we'll talk about that later. So this is what he says: suicide is the only important significant problem for us. So in order to handle that problem, you have to find a meaning, we have to find a purpose in our existence, purpose in our life. So this is the where meaning becomes necessary. Because of that, we'll see that our life is absurd, but absurdity for us is a problem that we have to solve. Other animal, it is not a problem. Other animals, their life is also absurd as ours. But it is not a problem for them. Why it is not a problem for other animals? It is not a problem for other animals because, well, other animals do not try to find meaning and purpose in the life. A dog, for example, does not sit under a tree and start thinking, who am I? Well, they are okay with whoever they are. We, on the other hand, we try to understand who we are. And the moment you ask this question from yourself, who am I? Well, you create a we understand a problem of absurdity. You create all the problems of life that you face. Solution also. So absurdity for other animal is not a problem. For them, this is a simple fact. For us, it is a problem that we must solve. Only then we can live a good life. This is the first important thing. Now, what makes it possible for a human being to solve the problem of absurdity? That is what we will talk about in the second point. So, second point is that, write down. Second point is freedom. Now here we will talk about third type of freedom in our course. We have already talked about two types of freedom: freedom as liberty and freedom as autonomy. I hope that you can understand the difference between the two. So in philosophy, normally we talk about three types of freedom: freedom as liberty, we discussed earlier; freedom as autonomy, we discussed in Kantianism; and third freedom will be existential freedom, which we normally call only freedom. Well, this is what we will talk about in this class. So freedom is another important concept of existential philosophy. What is freedom? Write down firstly. According to them, every person is always necessarily fundamentally and inalienably free regardless of one's personal circumstances or the level of social, economic and political oppression, OPPRESSION, oppression that one suffers from. Freedom is the, write down further, freedom is the only essential condition of human existence. Freedom is the only essential condition of human existence. Freedom is the only essential condition of human existence. So that is the second important thing. Idea here is that they say that every person is always necessarily, these are the important words, always, necessarily, fundamentally and inalienably free. That we cannot alienate our freedom. Just think of it how this freedom is different from other freedom that we have talked about. That we can alienate our liberty by giving our consent. We can give up our liberty. In this classroom, we don't have the liberty to, well, I can say, talk about non-ethical related issue. That liberty we have given up. We can alienate our liberty. We can give up our liberty through consent. But in this theory, freedom is inalienable, that we cannot give up our freedom, we cannot reduce our freedom. So, inalienably free regardless of one's personal circumstances. Now, we often blame our personal circumstances for the lack of our freedom. We say, well, I could not do anything in my life because of the personal circumstances that I had. Or sometimes we claim that we are victim of certain condition like social oppression, that we may belong to a lower caste, for example, scheduled caste, and we claim that a caste system did not allow me to do whatever I wanted. So we blame the caste system sometimes for that. Or sometimes we say economic condition, we may be very poor, and we claim that poverty did not allow me to take a choice that I would have otherwise made. Or sometimes political oppression, that minorities in a majoritarian state often suffers politically. Jews had to suffer a lot against the majoritarian Hitler. So sometimes we suffer because of our economic condition, economic condition like poverty, social condition like caste, or political condition like being a minority in a majoritarian state. So we suffer because of many of these things, and we claim that we don't have the choice, we don't have the freedom. But Sartre will say, in spite of all these oppressions that we may possibly suffer from, we are always free. Every moment human beings are free. So freedom is the only essential condition of human existence. This is what he said. In fact, there is another quotation of Sartre. He had said somewhere that there is no difference between being a man. There is no difference between being a man and being a free man. There is no difference between being a man and being a free man. So he said that when you say free man, then you are actually making a mistake. Two mistakes you are making. First of all, you are repeating yourself. So the moment you say man, freedom is always a part of that. Saying free man is a repetition. It is something like saying a wet water. So water is always wet. You don't have to add adjective wet with water. The moment water is there, it is wet. That's it. So you don't have to repeat wetness with wateriness. So it is repetition first of all. A second problem that you are creating here is that if you speak that man is a free man, then you can see they will say that people may assume that there are unfree man also. That is impossible. Human beings can never be unfree. Man is always free in every condition that a person possibly find himself in. See how different this freedom is from the other two freedoms that we had talked about earlier. If you look at the other two freedom like liberty, for example, and autonomy, in both of them there was one thing common was that liberty and autonomy, both of them were normative concept. They were normative ideas basically. So normative idea means what? They always created a norm that we should have liberty. So in both of them we can see that we use the term should. Look at the definition that we have written there. We have written there that every person should always be free. Well, unless and until whatever you can see. In autonomy also Kant had said that we are mostly heteronomous, but we should always be autonomous. So should was the operative term that created normative condition. Both of them were the normative concept. But this freedom that we are talking about now in this class, well, it is not a normative concept. It is simply a statement of fact. A statement of fact, because in this case we do not use the term should. Look at the sentence that you wrote there. We do not use the term should. We have used the term is. Every person is always free. Is a statement of fact. So we are not creating a norm that everybody should be free. We are simply stating a fact that okay, people are always free. That is the type of freedom that we talk about in this theory. So every person is always free. Freedom is the essential condition of human existence. Now, how do we exercise that freedom? Write down further. It is because of this freedom, it is because of this freedom that we make, it is because of this freedom that we make choices in our life. It is because of this freedom that we make choices in our life, and through these choices, and through these choices, we create a meaning and purpose, and through these choices we create a meaning and purpose in our existence. Through these choices we create a meaning and purpose in our existence. So this is the next important. They say that because of the freedom, every single moment of our life we make certain choices. So, and every time when you make a choice, then through that we create a new meaning, a new purpose in who we are. Just take a small example. Suppose, for example, all of you made your first important choice of your life, academic choice, I mean here, academic choice after say 10th standard, where you have three choices in front of you, and well, first choice was science, or second choice was, can say, commerce or humanity. Suppose there is a student who made a choice in favor of science, and other person who made a choice in favor of humanity. Now their life will never be same after that. They will be a very different person, different life, different meaning, different purpose of their life. Their meaning of life changes, their purpose of life changes, their direction of life changes, the essence of their life changes on that moment when they make a choice. So by making this choice, for example, they created a new meaning of who they are. Remember, meaning basically means answer to this question, who am I? So once they make a choice in favor of say science, then they made the first choice, that first answer to that question, who am I? So earlier they were a student, and now he becomes a science student. Being a science student becomes a, well, meaning of his or her life. 2 years later, well, again you have three choices. You will become an engineer, for example, or medical science or pure science. Now he makes a choice in favor of engineering, for example, then that will create a new meaning for him, who he is, an engineer now. Right now, you are trying to make a new choice in your life. If you become successful, then tomorrow you will get a new answer to that question, who am I? I am an IAS officer. Being an IAS officer will become meaning of your life. So the idea is that every single moment of our life, we make certain choices, and each choice that we make, it creates a new meaning for our existence, who we are. This choice, so these choices are very important. This choice can be as simple as, think of it, a few years ago, I posted a small quotation of Albert Camus, the second existential philosopher whose name I mentioned earlier. I posted a small quotation of Albert Camus on my Facebook page. Interesting quotation. He said, this quotation tells us simply that, should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee? Should I kill myself or have a cup of coffee? Now, many of my friends commented on that. One of my friends commented that if these are the only two choices that you have, then have a cup of coffee first and then kill yourself. You can do both of them. To which I replied, and this is what Albert Camus would have replied. I told my friend that, yes, you are right, my friend, I have decided to do that. But now I have to decide how many cups of coffee and how many years in. So I have decided I will have 40,000 cups of coffee in next 40 years. Now that will become a meaning of my life, a purpose of my life. I live because I want to create a Guinness Book of World Record of maximum number of cups of coffee maybe. So, but there has to be purpose. Why should I live this life? This purpose can be as simple as having a cup of coffee. So I want to have a cup of coffee tomorrow. For that, well, I can live today. I can look up to that. This is what I am living for. So it can be as simple as having a cup of coffee, and this can be as important as, well, becoming an IAS officer, becoming a prime minister of the country, getting a Nobel Prize, whatever it is. But there has to be some purpose for which we should live our life. So every moment we make a choice in our life, and these choices create a meaning and purpose of our life. There is a famous quotation of, can say, John Paul Sartre, further, same person. He said that that somebody asked him, who are you? And he said that I am my choices. I am not a biological organism that you are seeing in front of you. I am the sum total of all the choices that I have made in my life till today. I am my choices. Or the same quotation has been said, same idea has been expressed by him in another quotation somewhere else. He said that first we make our choices and then after our choices make us. So first we make our choice, well, every moment, and then after every choice that we make us. We are the product of our choice. We are the sum total of all the choices that we have made. Each choice that we make in our life, it adds a new meaning to our existence. New answer to this question, who am I? First we make our choices and then after our choices make us. So this is the second important thing that he talks about, freedom. Now this finally leads to the third concept, the most important concept of existential philosophy, and that is responsibility. Responsibility. Write down a few lines firstly. Since we make choices, because of our own freedom, so we alone are responsible for our choices and all its consequences. So we alone are responsible for our choices and its consequences. But this puts a heavy burden on man. This puts a heavy burden on man which many of us are unwilling to bear. Thus, in order to avoid this burden, we often try to escape from the responsibilities of our choice. But since that is impossible, so any attempt to escape from the responsibilities of our choice, will make our choice unethical. So that is the next important thing, most important aspect of his theory. The idea here is that they say that since we make our choice because of our own freedom every moment, so we alone are responsible for every choice that we make. But this sense of responsibility that we make a choice, it puts a heavy burden on man, which many of us are not willing to bear. And in order to avoid this burden, escape from that, we try to run away from the responsibilities of our choice. But he says that such running away is impossible. So if we make any attempt to escape from the responsibilities of our choice, then that will make our choice unethical. This is where the ethics part actually comes up. Now, what is the meaning of this term responsibility? How do we escape from the responsibility? And how do you take the responsibility? All of these things we'll talk about in tomorrow's class. So tomorrow we'll talk about this responsibility in more detail. So just I made you to write about the responsibility, discussion of responsibility and its importance in our life, we'll talk about in tomorrow's class. So